I had met a woman who had recently immigrated to Canada, and I commented on how quiet and calm her baby was. She said, "Oh, well, it's easy. I just drug her to keep her calm. It makes her so easy to manage. You might want to try it with your own kid." And I said, "No, that's just not part of our parenting culture. We do not sedate perfectly healthy children to make them easier to manage." She looked around the waiting room and she said that every single child in the waiting room was sitting completely quiet, completely calm, completely still with their eyeballs glued to an iPhone or to a tablet. And I realized in that moment that she made this really powerful point that the Canadian kids were being sedated too, just in a very different sort of way.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the AWE Digital Wellness Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Ritter. Co-host Christian Dominique will be joining shortly. But this week we have a really special guest with us. Katherine Martinko is on the pod. Katherine is a Canadian writer, journalist, and author based out of Ontario. She's the author of Childhood Unplugged, Practical Advice to Get Kids Off Screens and Find Balance. What really got you started down this road?
It was something that happened about 10 years ago when I had a little baby. My youngest son was a few months old, and I had met a woman who had recently immigrated to Canada. She and I were sitting in a doctor's waiting room together. We both had babies around the same age, and I commented on how quiet and calm her baby was, how, passive, placid. Whereas my child was the complete opposite. He was a little lunatic who made it his life's mission to evade sleep at every single opportunity. I asked her about this and she said, "Oh, well, it's easy. I just drug her to keep her calm." She said that she had this special syrup she'd brought from the motherland that she would just shake into the baby's milk bottle and administer to the child. And she said to me, "It makes her so easy to manage. You might want to try it with your own kid." And I said, "No, I will not be doing that. We don't do that here in Canada. That's just not part of our parenting culture. We do not sedate perfectly healthy children to make them easier to manage." And then she said something I will never forget. She paused for a moment and looked around the waiting room, and she said that every single child in the waiting room was sitting completely quiet, completely calm, completely still with their eyeballs glued to an iPhone or to a tablet. And I realized in that moment that she made this really powerful point that the Canadian kids were being sedated too, just in a very different sort of way. I really love this term, digital minimalism. I can't take credit for it. It was coined by author Cal Newport. He's a computer science professor at Georgetown University and an author of many books, one of which is titled Digital Minimalism. He defines it as a philosophy of technology use in which you focus your online time on a small number of carefully selected and optimized activities that strongly support your values, and then you happily miss out on everything else. I very much love modern technology. I think it's enabled my entire career. I think that we need to learn to treat it as a tool, not as a toy. I think that when you are a digital minimalist, you also are employing delay tactics as a parent and implementing strict rules and limits surrounding its use. Try to be very choosy about the technologies that you're using. So, and if it does not support your values, if it is not serving you, you reject it, you remove it from your life, you walk things back. I think a digital minimalist also strives to preserve childhood and recognizes it as a sacred time in life, a fleeting period of time that's never coming back, and it must be fiercely defended. I think that technology is inevitable at a certain point in, a young adult's life as they get older, but I do think that we should become a lot more defensive and protective about keeping it out of our youngest members of society's lives. I think that's very important. And finally, I would say that a digital minimalist always prioritizes in-person interactions. And I think that that's important, not only in the parent-child relationship, but even just out in the world as members of a society where we interact with people on a daily basis. So it's not doing away with tech completely or vilifying it. I do believe that we can coexist, but we have to be the ones who are the boss of it. We have to be the ones who retain the control of our time and our attention. For years, my oldest son had been asking, when can I get my first phone? His father and I sat down and wrote up a phone contract. His father and I own his phone. So we pay for it, we pay for the plan, and we also have the passcode. I've made it very clear that I do periodic spot checks without forewarning. And that is uncomfortable for a parent. As we know, it can feel like you're sort of invading privacy. And I think that privacy matters less than parenting. I think as parents, we have to make sure that the things that our kids are engaging with online are safe. And also they're not private if they're happening on someone's phone anyways. He cannot take it in his bedroom ever at night. It has to stay down in the kitchen, as I mentioned before. He also cannot take it to school. I mean, that's an opportunity for him to be unreachable for him to just be out on his own in the world, just like we all were growing up as kids. This really is not that foreign a concept. We just need to normalize it again in our society. So the phone came at 16. He has two younger brothers now who are eagerly awaiting their 16th birthdays so that they can get phones. And I offer workarounds. So we have a landline. I would say my youngest son, who just turned 11, is the one who uses the landline the most. And he calls everyone. He calls his best friend, he calls his grandparents, he calls me. So that's been a really great addition to our home. And then I would say my middle son, who's 14, he's in grade 9, he's the one who uses the computer the most to text his friends. So he keeps it all on that computer, but it lives in a common area of the home in this permanent location. Nothing inappropriate is happening because it's public. I mean, his brothers are also on that computer. They're reading all those texts too. So, that's been valuable. I mean, I think that I'm meeting him where, partway, where he's able to still have these conversations with his friends and participate in the group chats and get his fair share of ridiculous memes and videos and things like that. But when he gets up from that computer and goes outside, it's not with him anymore. There's actually higher rates of injury in organized sports than there are in children's free play. Kids become stronger, faster, healthier in general than when they're playing supervised by adults. It takes, on average, I think 40 to 45 minutes for a group of children to come up with an imaginary game of their own and lay out all of the rules and assign roles and figure out what the punishments are if someone breaks those rules. And kids get so lost in the best possible way in those imaginary worlds. Whereas if an adult is orchestrating the play and telling when a kid has to leave and come back in and all of these things, the kids lose interest because they're not invested in it one bit. It cannot dominate a child's schedule. And right now we're hearing about, North American kids' schedules just being notoriously jam-packed with organized activities to the point where they have no time to play anymore. I want to bring back opportunities for free play. I think that families can implement that in their own homes. They can send their kids outside. I did that a lot when my kids were younger. I'd say you have to be outside for an hour. I'm setting a timer. They would grumble and they would complain. And inevitably, though, they'd find something to do. And often their time would extend beyond the timer. The timer would go. I wouldn't go call them. Of course, if they're having fun, I would just leave them. But then they'd come back in eventually. So I think that that's important. There's some interesting work being done by the Let Grow Foundation, run by my friend Lenore Skenazy, and she advocates for the creation of Let Grow play clubs. It's before and after playtime that happens on the playground, but it's only loosely supervised by a teacher or an older teen. Screen-free time, there's no devices allowed, and the kids just play. And what I've heard from some principals who I've met at schools that have implemented this program is that it has transformed the children who attend it, especially the kids who struggle with behavioral problems. Some of the kids that, have to have EAs with them throughout the day. Those kids, on the days that they attend play club before class, report no behavioral incidents or issues throughout the day. And their caregivers are begging for play club to be implemented every single day of the week. So we know that kids who play are just calmer. They are happier. They're more well-adjusted. They get that energy out. They're feeling just a lot more grounded in the world and in their bodies than kids who are deprived of that. You can say to your kid, social media is just not an option right now. I know that's not what you want to hear. Maybe you can have it at some point down the road, but now is not the time. I just think that the fact that we are having this conversation is a sign of optimism and of success, that this message is landing with people. The fact that it's just blown up in the mainstream and is such a hot topic, I think, is cause for celebration. And it doesn't mean that we've won the fight by any means or that it's not going to be, a challenge. But I think that the cultural tone is shifting and in a direction that really looks like it's going to be benefiting our kids. So thank you for being part of making that happen and amplifying it.